Hey guys, welcome to our weekly Friday video, and sometimes we have a bonus video on Tuesday, but today we're going back to around 2008 and we're putting together a machine that I could only dream about back in the day. We have a fast Athlon 64, it is the X2 6400 Plus Black Edition. We've got a very nice Enforce SLI motherboard from ASUS, 4GB of DDR2 memory, and also two GTS 250 video cards in SLI. SLI started with 3DFX, Scanline Interleave was the name of the technology, and you could basically add a second video card, add an SLI bridge at the top, and in some games, and depending on the settings, almost double your performance. 3DFX ran out of money and Nvidia bought some of their assets. SLI is now called Scalable Link Interface, and having two video cards in SLI, it's always something I followed with great interest, but it was very expensive and usually I went with a single mainstream video card instead. Now in this video we have some benchmark comparison coming up to see what adding a second video card adds to this computer. The processor is the Athlon 64 X2 6400 Plus Black Edition. This is a dual-core processor running at 3.2 GHz. We have 2 MB of level 2 cache and a 125 watt TDP, so you definitely need some decent cooling for this one. The cooler I'm using is the 125 watt thermal solution from AMD. It's basically the Rave cooler without the shroud and the light. The motherboard is from ASUS and this comes from a PC store from AliExpress. Now I have bought 3 motherboards from them in the past and recently they contacted the channel to work with us. They also sent us a 4GB DDR2 memory kit that we will be using for this project. This seller packs motherboards really well with these plastic airbags, as well as using an anti-static bag. There's a sticker with a QR code, which will take you to a YouTube video seeing your motherboard being tested, which is a really nice touch. Now, I have to make a few comments about pricing. I noticed that pretty much all of the motherboards that I got from the seller have gone up in price compared to when I got them. This makes it really difficult to give recommendations because the price and value are a huge reason why I choose certain parts for my projects. A worst case, for example, is this MSI AM3 motherboard that I got for $35. I've been using it in a few previous videos, and at that price, I can definitely recommend it. But, well, the current price is now $75, and at that price, do not buy it. You can get a similar gigabyte board for $35 from other sellers. Another thing to consider if you're thinking about spending a little bit more to get a premium motherboard like this is, well, the motherboard is missing pretty much all of the bundled accessories. All we get is the I/O shield and a SATA cable. But with a premium board like this, they usually come with a ton of extra stuff. For example, this board came with a fancy heat pipe cooler for the RAM, and there was also a little fan that you could attach to the heatsink. We're also missing the SLI bridges, the Q connector, the IDE cables, and other bits and pieces. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you assess the value. This motherboard has a ton of features. For example, we're getting 6 SATA 2 ports with 3 gigabits per second. Nice heat pipes going on here for the cooling. We've got 4 slots for DDR2 memory. In terms of other ports, we've got 3 headers for USB 2, so that gives you 6 USB 2.0 ports, but also ports for FireWire, for example. At the back, we've got a PS2 port, we've got 4 USB 2.0 ports, we've got digital out for coaxial as well as optical. The chipset has onboard graphics, VGA and HDMI outputs, gigabit Ethernet, there's eSATA and also audio. For memory, we're using a 4GB kit from Vaseki, rated at 800 MHz with 66618 timings, and these memory modules work just fine. I will put a link to these down below in the description. And now onto the graphics cards. They're a little bit newer and from around 2009. Now the GTS 250, they are not part of the GTX 280 or 260 range of cards. They are based on the G92 GPU and related to the 8800 GT and all of the other many variants of that card. The GTS 250 is basically the final revision and I always wanted to have one of these. I got these Lite cards last year, I believe. They come with 1 GB of video memory and require a 6-pin power connector. I had some issues installing Windows XP on a SSD. The SSD would show up in the BIOS, but when you get to the Windows XP installation screen, it just wouldn't show up. I believe this is an issue with SATA 3, maybe not working with the Enforce SATA controller, so I switched to a standard SATA hard drive. This is a Western Digital Blue 250 GB, a little bit older. It's probably SATA 1 or SATA 2, and that hard drive worked just fine. And then I ran into a technical issue. I would get these green flashing patterns on the screen, and it turned out to be an issue with the SLI bridge. So I tried out a few of my bridges and found one that works without any glitches. And here we have some benchmarks in 3D Mark 2001 SE. There's not much difference, probably because the processor is holding things back. That does change in 3D Mark 2003, where we get really nice scaling. And in 2005, once again, we don't see too much scaling going on. Let's move on to some games. Here we've got Doom 3 at full HD with 4x anti-aliasing and 16x anisotropic filtering. Nice scaling in this game. Moving on to Far Cry. Here we really not getting much of a performance boost at all. In Half-Life 2, once again, we're seeing some really decent scaling going on. And also in Fear, once again, nice scaling. That's almost 100% performance gain. 100 FPS, that is fantastic performance. And now we're gonna have a look at some games. I will put the title and the settings down below in the video.
Crest 50, turn 6 right, big cut, inside sign. Into 6 left and K 5 right over crest. And 6 left, 30. 5 right over crest and jump. And long 4 left, 30. Turn 2 left and fence. Third.
Called in reinforcements. Enemy units headed your way.
County. I've got him again. Commencing pursuit.
It's Frank. Answer if you're there. Janet, where are you? We're all waiting for you at headquarters.
So guys, what is the verdict of such a SLI system? It's definitely something very cool to experience, and I like working with parts that back in the day were simply way too expensive and often quite poor value. We could see some nice scaling at very high resolutions and graphics settings, and apart from Crysis, pretty much any game from the Windows XP era should run silky smooth. It's also a very power-hungry machine. I wouldn't call it quiet either. And if you're looking for value, well, you're better off getting a cheap socket 775 with a fast Core 2 Duo and a GTX 750, and you will have something that's even faster, consumes less power, and is quieter. But having said all that, if you want to experience SLI from that era, then this is a pretty sweet machine. The CPU did a good job at feeding the two cards, and I believe this was my first time that I actually used an Athlon 64X2, and the performance was quite impressive, but I believe this is the top model, so yeah, it's definitely not a slouch. Now, what do you think about SLI for retro gaming? Is it worth the higher cost, and is it a better experience, or do you prefer something with a single card? I will see you next week with our weekly Friday video, but keep an eye out for Tuesday. Sometimes there will be a bonus video. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Give it a like and click on that notification bell, and I shall see you soon with another one.